This particular case gave Holmes and myself quite a confounding headache. My aim is not to provide the same malady to you as I recount the tale. Often when I write about my adventures with Sherlock, my observations need to be supported by none other than the world's greatest detective himself, my friend Holmes. This story began in a small country village of Conforth. Holmes had recently brought to a successful conclusion the affair of the Barrow and Furnace wheelchair murders. A rickety affair, to be sure. And we decided a few days' rest in nearby Conforth would do us good before returning to the arduous life of Baker Street. We were staying in a small but comfortable inn. On the morning of the third day, I remember, Holmes and I were in our bedroom, waiting for those two essentials without which an English country gentleman would not start his day. An early morning cup of tea and a jug of hot water for bathing. As we sat there at the open window, a nearby church bell was tolling a funeral knell. Well, there must be a funeral in the village, Holmes.
An astonishing deduction, Watson. What makes you say so? Could it be the somber and foreboding bell?
Oh, there's no need to make fun of me, but impressive sound, isn't it?
I suppose so. Yes. Now that you mention it, I never really thought about it before. Has it ever occurred to you, Watson, that the history of bells is filled with romance?
Why, Holmes, I can't say that I've thought much about it.
Well, almost every historical event that has been ever occurring in modern history was accompanied by the sound of one sort of bell or another. They summoned soldiers to arms as well as Christians to church.
Yeah.
They sounded the alarm during the invasion, and of course cloister bells going back, and red alert at sea, not to mention chimes. Yes, many a horrific event throughout human history has been rung in and rung out by the sound of bells.
Well, you seem to be a fountain of information on the subject.
Well, in fact, Watson, I am, for it is a fascinating subject. Ding-a-ling.
With the church bell tolling a funeral knell, one question must be answered, Sherlock.
Well, when will this pealing cease so that I can read in peace?
More mysterious than that. Do you know who's being buried today?
I don't know. I have no idea. Okay, I noticed that our hostess, Marion, was wearing all black last evening, and she did seem somewhat distraught.
Perhaps Marion's father or mother just died. Oh, or a young man of her acquaintance. Yes, I bet that's it. She's a very pretty girl. She'd obviously been crying when she brought in the tea tray. I tried to ask if she was all right, but it was clear that she wanted to be left alone.
Did you perchance notice if Marion was wearing a ring, Watson?
I didn't spare a glance, but perhaps that's her fiancé they're burying now.
Watson, you have the sentimental imagination of a true storyteller, don't you? The romance in those bells may have gotten to you as much as to me, but we've come here for a holiday. So you must give your imagination a rest as well. Drink up. You can remove that new layer of whiskers, and then we'll go downstairs and investigate those kippers that I smell.
You like your kippers, Holmes?
Oh, kippers for breakfast. They're about as popular as I am. They're my kindred spirit, Watson.
Kindred kippers indeed. Sherlock, look here. Some answers right under our noses. It's two souls that are being buried today, and according to this, one of them was a murderer.
Ooh, a murderer, Lord, in this peaceful, uninspiring village. All right, read on, Macduff, read on.
All right. Yes, old Threadgold, the corn merchant, found out his wife had been gallivanting around with a young fellow from Bolton. Cut her throat, he did. Oh, and then hanged himself. Dear me. What, more tea?
No, thank you.
Shocking. So the peaceful countryside is not as peaceful as it's made out to be, Holmes.
Thankfully, I've frequently had occasion to point that out to you already, Watson. Oh, has the Morning Post arrived?
A murder? What do you make of it, Holmes?
What? A murder? What is there to make of a murder? It's a jealous husband who murders a faithfuless wife and then commits suicide. It's a tragic story, but it's a very simple one. Were there any letters for me from London today?
A simple story? When has that ever been the case?
Oh.
If I am suspicious of this article, then you must be crawling out of your skin to know more about
I'm
it.
crawling out of my skin to know if the Post arrived today, Watson.
Oh, yes, no, forgive me, Holmes, there are a few letters on the table. One of them's got some newspaper clippings in it, I think, and you got a postcard from Lestrade, and he wants you to get started on a serial killer case. Are we surprised?
You were right. It is a bunch of newspaper clippings, Watson.
Yes. Hey, Holmes, do you know the identity of the bell ringer as well as the postman that delivered those messages?
It's Mr. Gillian, I think. He's the president of the Choral Society, too, as well as being on the Perry's Council around these parts.
Yes, look, there he is now. What a busy man. Such a different pace here in this small town compared to the hustle and bustle of London proper.
Yes, well, his work is not quite done yet, Watson. I noticed that there is a wedding notice in the newspaper that indicates that young St. Perry is marrying the Slater girl. Look for that.
Oh.
Yes, Mr. Gillian, apparently
Yes.
responsible for bringing those lovebirds together, according to what he told me last night.
Oh.
Their betrothal announcement includes this anecdote about how Gillian got some of their letters all mixed up, and the happy couple looked at each other up to exchange their post, and then presto, before you know what's happening, they're getting married.
He's a regular Cupid, you might say. I wonder what brings him to this part of town today. Who is that letter from, Holmes?
Yeah, this is from Mrs. Lackland.
Ah, yes, of course. She has a seamstress shop on High Street, yes. Her only son ran away from home a few months back. I think that's what she wants to speak to you about. I've been telling everyone that you're supposed to take a rest.
Oh, yes,
better
quite
to-
right. But nothing is more restful to me than reading, Watson.
Oh, Holmes, really? Sounds like a trivial matter.
No, Watson. The disappearance of an only son can never be a trivial matter.
Well, I meant trivial for you, not for her.
You have such a lovely bedside manner, Doctor. Here, would you take a look at this, John?
Miss Lackland's son, Tom, left 4 months ago without a word. He was a hard worker, and he didn't fool around with those flippity gibbet girls in the village.
And I thought I had a way with words, Watson.
Miss Lackland believes her son was met with foul play. She can only offer £20 to uncover what happened to Tom. I don't see how we can help her home.
No, nor do I at the moment. Well, a young man grew up in this small village, and he might have been leading a life in which his mother is totally unaware, Watson. You did mention last night that you have to work on one of your stories today, is that correct?
Yes, I received a letter from the editor of the Strand magazine yesterday, requesting a manuscript as soon as possible.
Yes, splendid. Then you must stay here and work on your latest masterpiece, on my mental masterwork, while I scour all of these documents and see what may be found out about the missing young man that Miss Lackland is looking for.
Huh. And so the day picked up speed. Holmes and I parted company, but it wasn't long before we found ourselves back where it all began. I would have gotten more writing done if it hadn't been for those infernal bells. As my effect on my ability to think clearly, the gonging permeated the air and stretched the length of time into endless chasm. By midday, I forced myself to concentrate, and I noticed that the chimes were somber and slower than one would expect for a wedding celebration. How odd. I was too wrapped up in my writing of my book to investigate further. The bells lulled me into a restful slumber.
I'm back. I brought chocolates.
Yes, what a productive day. I've already got about half a chapter. What did you find out about Miss Lackland's son?
You've just been roused from a sleep cycle. Splash some water in your face and then prepare to take some notes. I'm not going to remember all of this twice.
All right, I'm ready. I'm ready, of course, Holmes. I'm simply enjoying a nap on my vacation.
All right, we'll sleep when we're dead, Watson.
All right. Is Tom Lakeland dead, Sherlock?
No, stop guessing. No. Tom had a secret love life unknown to his mother. Yes, take another drink. Would you like more?
Yes.
You're going to need a stiff one, in fact, to get through what I'm going to tell you right now, Tom,
Please.
because the object of Tom's affections was none other than the maid Marion who brought us our tea this morning. Yes.
Marion?
Yes.
Marion? What? Well, this is a coincidence, Holmes.
Well, based on the size of Comfort, it's actually not much of a surprise at all, but I felt like it would help awaken you.
Well, I appreciate it. Did you talk to Marion yet?
That wasn't easy. She is not a reliable girl, Watson.
All right, that village bell was tolling again. I didn't feel the cheer that accompanies nuptials, however.
Now, that's because these chimes were for another funeral, Watson.
Another death. In such a small village as Confort, how does the population stand for this?
It's another suicide, John.
Another suicide? Good Lord, what are the chances of such despair? Who was it, Holmes?
Old John Letterby. He was the baker, and he was expecting some money from his son to come to us from Australia to save his shop, but it never arrived. They foreclosed recently, and he hanged himself.
Oh no. Oh, how utterly tragic.
Yes, Watson. This peaceful little village is beginning to seem strangely sinister suddenly.
So, you were going to tell me about your conversation with Marion.
Yes, Mrs. Lackland asked me to try and find her son, Tom.
Well, did you find him, Holmes?
Watson, I'm not a machine. Give me a minute, please.
Okay, wait a moment. I remembered something and instantly asked Holmes. Is this the moment when you retrieved the letter, the one from me?
Yeah, what of it?
Well, I asked you to guess who had sent it. Remember, you skirted my question most furtively.
Well, it reeked with the smell of violets, it did. And it was written in green ink on gray paper.
Amazing memory. But have you figured out who sent it to me? I know that these minor mysteries are just as devilishly intoxicating for you as a murder case can be for every other looky-loo.
Your letter came from the likes of your young friend in Dallas, Watson.
How do you know I don't have a young friend in Dallas, Watson.
Quite.
Back to Tom Lakeland, Sherlock.
No, I'd rather talk about suicide. Old Letterby hanged himself because he didn't get away with all the money he was supposed to receive from his son in Australia.
Oh, Australia.
And then while I was retrieving your putrid-smelling love note, I saw the letter that Letterby was waiting for within the postman's satchel. And that letter would have saved his life if he had received it earlier, Watson.
Scott, what ghastly piece of irony.
Yeah, that it was, Doctor, that it was. But there is another horror left to unfurl. This romance.
Excuse me, what romance?
Marion is married to Tom Lackland.
What?
Yes, he told me all about it. They were married secretly in Rockdale 5 months ago this Tuesday.
And he never told his mother.
Naturally, that's where your mind would go, Watson. You are a psychiatrist's dream. No, he didn't tell his mother. He was afraid to tell Mrs. Lackland. She thought that Marion was beneath their station. Tom said that he'd go away, get a good job, and return for Marion, but he never came back. He never sent word.
Okay, and when he left, did he give no clues to his destination? No hints of any kind?
Well, he once said, "Mary, I'm going to clear out of this puddle and make me fortune, even if I got to bury it." Yes, and then he said, "Bury me fortune, eh? That's a joke, isn't it?" But, I simply don't know what he meant by that, Watson.
Of course, he had known exactly what he was meant by that. He was Sherlock Holmes. So I pressed on and I asked him. A buried treasure, Holmes. Oh, where is it, may I ask?
You may do more than ask. You can witness. for we are going to go to the town of Bury in search of this maid Marion's husband.
Okay, well, what makes you think Tom Lackland might be in Bury, Sherlock?
Because, Dr. Watson, the famous fortune cotton mills are in Bury, and it would seem possible that when Tom joked about burying his fortune, he was talking about going there to the mills.
Yes, of course. No, I remember the mills, and if I recall correctly, you left me standing outside the factory gates as if I were a blasted coachman when we arrived.
I gave you my gloves to keep you warm. You're so ungrateful.
I still have them.
And we had Tom at that moment, and you gave him quite a layering of guilt, didn't you, Watson?
I believe I said, "How dare you, Tom, leaving your old dear mother and deserting your pretty little bride because you're ashamed of her. You're a scoundrel, sir. You deserve a good horse whipping, and I have a good mind to give it to you."
But not only did you not have a horse, it seems Tom didn't have any idea what you were even talking about.
Okay, and that's when you told him that Tom Lackland was the amateur heavyweight champion of the county.
Yes, you had said that his name sounded familiar to you, remember, Watson?
That's when we heard the revolver shot.
Yes, we deduced that it had come from Marion's house.
Had the young girl shot herself?
Well, surely you remember this bit, Watson. Her last-minute lack of courage had made her shot go wild. Ever amazed by your reflexes, I witnessed as you rescued the smoking revolver right from Marion's hand as Tom made his way across the floor towards her.
I must confess the reunion between the two young lovers was a touching sight. In fact, I felt considerably older than I was as I stood there listening to Tom reassure Marion.
She had tried to kill herself, but she hadn't the courage. But the time had come to reassure Mary that Tom wrote to her.
Yes, he said he even sent her money and told her he'd be back to take her to Bury as soon as he'd saved up enough.
But alas, Gilly the postman deliberately withheld all of those letters from Marion.
Well, I still haven't been able to answer the obvious question. Why?
Well, I have my suspicions about that, strong suspicions, but I have proof. That's the hard thing to find. Mr. Threadgold murdered his wife, but how had he learned of her infidelity? I didn't know.
Oh, Miss McCall did say some letters got mixed up. The letters addressed to her were delivered to his office instead of to his house.
But that's Gilly's handiwork again. Surely this whole terrible pattern begins to take shape, and I was determined that I must lay a trap to get to the bottom of it.
Well,
To spring it, I needed Tom's assistance, though.
Yes, but he was eager to do anything to help.
Well, they got themselves up to Mrs. Lackland's house, and they were hiding there, and they made sure that no outsiders saw them until they heard from me first.
Since the two lovebirds had been separated for 4 months, I don't imagine that was too unpleasant for them.
Yes, quite, Watson, quite.
What was your master plan, Holmes?
My master plan was simple. Before the sun rose again, I was to free the whole village from one of the most subtly evil powers that I had ever come in contact with.
We continued the ruse that Marion had indeed committed suicide and arrived in time for her funeral service, but I was nervous. Well, supposing Gilly turns nasty when he finds out we know his secret.
Well, then we must handle him to the best of our ability, Watson.
Well, I must say I do not relish the thought of a tussle high in the belfry of a church. The man must be insane.
Well, yes, obviously. That's why he went to his belfry. Well, aside from the obligatory bats within, that was where his power must be destroyed.
And he wasn't too surprised to see us coming up the stairs.
Well, Gilly had gone mad with power, of course. He tried to control the destiny of an entire village, and in his position as the postman, you thought he had power to deliver life and death.
He believed himself to be a god. That's sacrilege.
Yes.
What a scoundrel. You challenged him with the responsibility for the murder of Miss Threadgold.
Yes, and for John Letterby's suicide. That was on him, too.
Letterby tried to vote him off the village council. Gilly swore he'd make Letterby pay for it, and he did.
But he didn't know that he'd already failed, Watson, because Marion was still alive.
Yes, the next bit I couldn't have predicted. In a flash, he was running up the ladder, leading to the bell tower.
By that point, he was mad as a hatter, indeed.
Quiet. I thought he might set fire to the steeple.
Well, there was only one way down from atop that tower, Watson. He stood in that tiny loft containing his beloved bells, but he couldn't stand that noise in that confined space. He wasn't planning on listening for very long, unfortunately.
No, and I could not believe my eyes when he hurled himself out of the belfry, Holmes. Oh, he hadn't any chance of surviving that fall. It was gruesome.
Well, I had no intention of causing that unhappy man to jump to his death, Watson. Though I can't help but feel that his poor, demented mind may find a happier oblivion that way, rather than in the confines of some asylum somewhere.
Yes, you're probably right, Holmes.
It's been a shocking case, Watson. Shocking. Once again, it proves the old saying that violence does indeed recoil upon the violent. Also, the schemer falls into the pit which he digs for another.
Any other clever lines I should add to my dialogue when I write this one, Sherlock?
Just my lunch order, Watson. I'd really like a sandwich.